Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. I'm your host, Lucas McCann. With me today, very special guest, longtime friend, Deedre Daniel, CEO, co-founder of the very interesting Conversations Company. Welcome, Dee.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And I've known you long enough to call you Dee, so if throughout this episode I call you Dee and not Deedre, as it will be listed on the, I'm just going to ask for forgiveness.
That's all right.
It's too ingrained.
Yeah.
Well, tell us more about the very interesting conversation game, the interesting Conversations Company. Give us the rundown.
Yeah. So my mission is to help people think more creatively, laugh, and build stronger bonds with others. So all activities, all services, all products deliver on one or all three of those ideas. And at the core of it is how to help people be more interesting than a cell phone. And that's either individually or their events or the business itself.
I know that some of this just comes naturally to you. I've known you long enough. Before the Interesting Conversations Company, you've always been interesting. Your keynotes at ASAE were always the most well-attended. You filled rooms. You are funny. You can say that. I can say that. What pushed you into making it a whole company? Is this like just the calling that finally had to come?
Yeah, well, I had a secure job at Geico. I was running the affinity marketing division. I had almost a 2-decade-long career there. And insurance is one of those things everyone has to buy. They don't want to buy it, but it's illegal to drive without insurance. And so we never had to worry about, are we going to be paid on payday? I mean, it was just this very stable company. My boss loved me. I got a lot of freedom, lots of pats on the head, and I was good at what I did. I loved my team. I loved my customers. And so it didn't make sense to leave. And then one day my boss quit. It's very sudden. And at that point I had been burning out, but I couldn't justify leaving this safe, secure career. And there were other things going with me mentally. I was in sort of like a depressive funk, we'll call it. And so I thought, maybe I need a career change. And so I left that safe job to go work for a smaller company with an inflated title and a little bit more pay. And they fired me 9 months later, just before Christmas. So that allowed me to have a little bit more reflection on my life. And they always say, when you're at rock bottom, you have nothing left to lose. So I couldn't leave the safe job. But once I didn't have a job, well, now I actually have more options. And I started thinking about, what is it that I'm good at? Like, what am I really good at? And people always asked me for help in the following areas. They wanted help like making new friends, or coming up with an interesting party idea, or how to communicate with their team to motivate them, or how to get more sales. And the one thing that they all had in common is they were trying to find ways to stand out. So I thought, well, maybe I can help people do that. And a big part of that is attracting people to you. And because people, all opportunities come from people. They give you proposals, promotions, and propositions. So you need to get the right people in your life. And then you also have to form the right relationships with those people. And I'm not saying this is about using other people, but it is thinking about the fact, like, a lot of times Americans like to romanticize that lone cowboy, the person who's out there, going through the wilderness by themselves kind of thing. But really what we need are all of these characters that you see in other movies. I would say like The Wizard of Oz is a good example. I mean, Dorothy's strutting along. She needs to, get to the Emerald City, and she picks up these 3 crazy characters along the way, right? And they help her, and they don't just help her come up with like a plot. They also give her a lot of emotional support, and they cheer her on, and they want her to win. And that's what we need in our life. We need those people to help us win. So I thought, all right, I can help people create that life that they want by helping them to stand out in a good, interesting way. The good, interesting way. I mean, there's bad, interesting, right? Where people go, oh, that was That was interesting. I never want to bite into that sandwich again. Ugh, I don't want to go. I don't want to hang out with that person. They're interesting. There's two different kinds. I've been both. I
Yeah.
know. So I'm trying to help people attract the right people by being interesting in a good way, so that they can have those opportunities.
So I've seen you do this in a couple of forums. I've seen your keynote, How to Be More Interesting Than a Cell Phone. Amazing. Highly recommended if you're listening. I've seen this in real life on a bus, which we'll come back to. I've seen you do this in different presentations, and I've seen you do it just in real life. I mean, when and how did all of that evolve? Like the actual structuring of these different elements of like, this is exactly what I do and how I do it. Like, how did you come to those as the vehicles of delivering interestingness, if that's even a word?
Yeah, okay. So when I was a little girl, my mom, I'll never forget, she like marched into my bedroom and I'm playing with my Barbies and, daytime drama. And my mom walks in and she says, "What are you telling Mrs. Johnson?" And we lived out in the middle of the country. We had 2 neighbors and just woods, right? And I had no one to talk to. And I would walk over to Mrs. Johnson and just talk to her for hours. And so she kept telling my parents, "Your daughter is so interesting. She is so interesting." And so,
Is
of
that
course,
like bless your heart? Like
no, she
Okay.
really thought I was interesting. But my parents thought, obviously, that I was talking about them. And I said, I'm not telling Mrs. Johnson anything about you. And they were adamant that I was talking. They were like, "Please stop telling Mrs. Johnson stuff about us." I'm like, I'm not talking to Mrs. Johnson about. And then, of course, now I'm wondering as a kid, like, well, what are you doing that I shouldn't be telling the neighbors about all
Got
that?
secrets.
Yeah. And so looking back at it, I was telling her about things that I read. And because my mom would take me to the library and I'd get stacks of books. And so I was just telling Mrs. Johnson about all these different books that I was reading. And so she thought that was very interesting. And you carry that forward now and today. Most people don't read a book after they graduate from school at all. Did you know that? Like the average number of books people read after they leave high school is like 1 book a year. Even less than a book a year. Yeah. And so then we think about like, how are people spending their time? And we're wasting it in all of these different areas. And we're not filling our brains with interesting things to talk about. And so that's such a basic thing you can do to be more interesting is, what it's your inputs. What goes in comes right back out of your mouth,
You have to be around interesting people to sort of osmosisly, through osmosis, you sort of suck some of that in. Does it help to be around interesting people?
Well, it does. And it also helps to expose yourself to new things, new ideas. Make sure you're not living in this little bubble where the people around you all think and say the same things. It's important to be able to debate and discuss opposing points of view without becoming hostile. It's important to be authentic. And I know that's a word people throw around a lot, but you think about so much of today feels like a lie. I can't eat anything without some sort of article coming out telling me that it's terrible for my health. And then I'll go and eat something else that's supposed to be good for me. And they'll say, well, actually, that's not good for you either. It's filled with chemicals, or the eggs come from chickens that were stressed, and you need the eggs that come from chickens that are read bedtime stories. Okay, well, they have to be, better bedtime stories. And it just goes on and on and on. And so I think we as a society are craving honesty. So when we come across someone who doesn't have a filter, it's really refreshing and therefore interesting. So you're reading different things, so you have new ideas. You're authentic. You're not afraid to share your ideas with other people. You have empathy. Like you're not just in your own head, but you take the time to really think about other people and their experiences and what they're going through and how to relate to them. And then asking better questions instead of asking the same old questions. day in and day out that we're all hit with, and debating and discussing opposing points of view without becoming hostile. I mean, that's the formula to being more interesting.
Yeah. What does it look like to be interesting today as opposed to 20 years ago, right? Because I think some people get stuck in time, right? So if you're not reading and you're not learning, you're kind of stuck in time, right? You're doing things how you did them 20 years ago. And I think part of the idea is, there's a newer way to be interesting today than there was, again, 20 years ago. How's it changed?
I think just eye contact at this point is way more interesting.
You mean like this kind of eye contact?
Yeah, for real. Yeah, for real.
Right.
I know it's so hard. We're becoming more isolated. Now, someone asked me the other day, is it cell phones that are pulling people apart? Like, here we have all these abilities to communicate and be connected, yet we're more disconnected than ever before. And I met a little old lady. I probably shouldn't call her old lady, but she was in her 90s. So can we see, old lady.
Yeah. You won't be canceled for that. You're good.
Named Sally, and she was showing me her house, and she was so proud of her house. And she had one of those old houses with a big front porch. And she told me that back in the day, she remembers a time before air conditioning. And after dinner, she said everyone would sit on their front porches and people would stroll down the street and they'd wave at their neighbors and they would walk up to the porch and sit down and have a glass of lemonade or iced tea and they would talk. And once air conditioning came about, they all went inside and that stopped. And people were no longer sitting on the front porch because it felt so much better inside alone, just immediately with their family. So, with every single advancement that we have in society, there is this adjustment where we're not talking as much. And I think just to take the time to talk to someone and put your phone down and focus on them, that alone will make you incredibly interesting because no one else is doing that. They're all so distracted, and people want to feel important, and if you take the time to really focus on them, that alone will make you stand out.
Yeah, see here, I thought it was like the invention of the television that canceled all that because then everyone's just sitting in front of the set box, back in the day with the 4 channels and the bunny ears, as I was when I was a kid. But then I thought, well, maybe before that it was actually the radio that got people off the streets, and now I've learned something new. It was actually air conditioning that killed all, social humanity.
Yeah, so air conditioning, but then of course, radio and then TV. But at least I remember watching shows with my family. I mean, we all would watch the same show together, and then my friends also watched the same shows, and we could talk about them the next day. But now we're so fragmented in our content that we absorb. You can't just have a conversation with someone else the next day about a show that just came out because they're going to watch it at a different time.
Yeah. What do you think it is about associations that draw you to being interesting, like that draw them to you? Like, I know a lot of associations reach out, they want you to speak, they want you to work with them. Like, what is more common that you hear on the front end of those conversations? Like, hey, Dee, we're really having a problem with fill in the blank for us.
Yeah. So what people usually ask for is they'll say, all right, we're looking for a way to help our attendees develop professionally, and a lot of them want some sort of communication training, but they also want to laugh, and we have a lot of serious content, and a lot of the information or news that we're going to share with our industry happens to be bad and depressing, and we need something that's going to lighten up the mood.
Just very serious.
This is very serious. We have very serious topics that we have to cover, and a lot of people are going to be losing their jobs, and we need to bring you in and make them laugh. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. So that's usually what they're reaching out to me for. And they want, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Continue.
Well, so that's for the keynote, how to be more interesting than a cell phone. And then if they're trying to change up their networking experience, then they'll bring me in to run like a live game show. And in that situation, they really just want people to talk and laugh and bond with each other. And they're not so worried about like an education component. It's more of the interactivity.
Yeah, I mean, you and I were talking before the show, sharing some war stories and some industry stories, and the ones that obviously we remember are the ones that have an element of humor, an element of interestingness. Again, like I've been to 1,000, seminars and shows where they're talking about very serious things, and I honestly just couldn't recall 98% of that. But the things where it was sort of out of the ordinary, a little bit different, their approach to it, where we laughed, those are the things you remember. That's sort of the feeling element of your memory. And I think it's so important. And in today's world where everybody's, attention is the new currency, as everybody says, like you're looking to get attention as much as money or anything else.
And that's why I weave comedy into my talk, is because the last thing I want is for the audience to be bored. And here I am talking about how to be more interesting than a cell phone. I can't be boring. I often think about that title, like the pressure is on. I have to deliver.
Yeah, you can't be boring. Your
No.
whole point is to
Can you imagine? People are like, this
Just
is
to
the most
teach.
boring keynote I've ever been to. Yeah.
just really monotone.
Yeah.
These are the 5 steps to being less.
I've thought about doing that
Boring.
as sort of an ironic way, but they might not know me well enough to get the joke. So I don't do that.
No, you should totally do that. That's, and I want to be there when you do.
Well, I recently spoke in Seattle. It was to an audience of 4,500 people, and they decided to play AC/DC, and it was like, "Rawr!" Like loud, music. And then they're like, oh, or we could do Welcome to the Jungle, rawr! And all this. And it's huge audience, huge stage. And I was like, what do I do? It'd be kind of funny if I just walked out there and said, hi, that'd be great. But they might not
Real
laugh.
meek
They might
like.
not get it because they don't know me well enough. Yeah.
You need to train with one of those magicians, that like does a quick change to their wardrobe. If you could do that and walk out there with like a really simple outfit that you never wear, and then like snap into it like an immediate thing into
Oh,
something
I like
more
that.
interesting.
Yeah. So walk out on something that's all beige.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No offense to those listeners who are wearing beige at the moment, but that's okay.
Or you. I just
Well,
nice
speaking,
beige shirt.
thanks, Steve. I'm totally offended, as you know. Well, speaking of something interesting, right? The whole idea of this episode came from, I think, our producer who was on the bus to ASAE, the association chat road trip to ASAE annual, which Big Red M was the sponsor, and you were the MC. Like, I think he was just so enamored by the whole thing. Tell our audience a little bit more about the bus and the road trip.
Yeah. Well, so I had never emceed a bus before. And when you asked me to be on the bus, you didn't originally ask me to MC it. It just sort of naturally happened. And, we were talking about what would we do on the bus? And 6 hours, possibly longer, if you hit traffic, that's a lot. And the people on the bus have been to many conferences and parties and events, so they actually have a high standard and a lot of things to compare it to. And I looked online, like, what do you do on a bus? And I looked at all the different activities. I thought, okay, we're not going to do these. We have to do new and different activities. And then you have to think about the structure of the bus, what's possible, because it's moving and we can't move people around too much. And they're also sitting, facing in this direction, or they could sort of turn this way or that way. So how do we make these activities fit for the bus in that time? And then I thought it would be cool to learn some new skills that they could then share with other people or remember years and years into the future. And I was reading this book, and it was all about like survival skills and how to be a spy and all that kind of stuff. And one of them was how to get out of zip ties using a hairpin. And I thought, how fun would it be if we put everyone in zip ties and we showed them how to pick a zip tie with a hairpin and get out of them? Because you got to leave the bus with skills, right? And they loved it. I mean, they had a great time. What was interesting for me was learning that a lot of the bobby pins that are available today don't work in that capacity because they no longer have that little chewy thing that you can chew off the end.
That's unfortunate. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I totally do.
Yeah, it's like you could put it in your mouth and sort of peel it off with your teeth. And I'm
Yeah,
assuming
it's like
someone,
the end of a new pen. You know, like when you get a new pen, it's got the little
yes,
thing dimple on
little,
the end. Yeah.
yeah, this little rubbery thing that you can just pull off. And I'm pretty sure someone with an MBA decided, if we dip them like this, we can save a penny or what have you. And so, and extrapolate that out to millions of dollars saved or what have you. So I had to find the right bobby pins that would work. And so anyway, I showed them the difference and they learned how to pick those zip ties. So it was
There
fun.
was all sorts of fun and interesting thing. The biggest thing that I took away was kind of just what you said was, okay, let's put down everything that we've always done or that you would expect to do on a bus, like put it on the table and then throw it away. And then let's come up with something brand new that like would almost the opposite, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to go in exactly a completely different direction, but it's how do you deliver on something in a completely different way that people aren't used to, right? I mean, you get 100 emails that are all, or LinkedIn requests from people, and they almost all read the same. And
They
it's
do,
so
yeah.
hard to stand out. Actually, it's not hard. You just have to think about it, and you have to be intentional. But there's so many people not thinking about it. It's just be different in a way.
And we took it down to the introductions. And so often when you get a group of people together, it's go around in a circle or on Zoom or what have you, say your name, say where you work, and then it's the follow-up icebreaker question. It's the dreaded tell us something interesting about yourself, or what's your favorite candy bar, or just something like, where do you like to go on vacation? And most people panic because what you're doing is you're forcing them into a public speaking scenario, and most people, and you can look at all the different studies, are afraid of public speaking. Like they view death as easier than speaking in public. And then also people don't really want to share that. Like they might not want to tell you where they go on vacation. They might, for different reasons, they might be embarrassed about it or what have you. And maybe they don't want to tell you about their favorite candy bar, or it's just too hard to narrow down their favorite movie because there's 500,000 of them. And how do you pick the best one? And do they really want you to know that they like Porky's or whatever, whatever it is? Like so they're going to come up with something else. And so then you're not learning anything about that person anyway. So let's change up the introduction. So that's what we did right out the gate.
So talk about that. How did you do it differently?
Yeah. So the first thing I thought of is, people don't realize that over half the population now identifies as introvert. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. Well, so it used to be like there are lots of studies. If you were to Google this now, you'll probably find something that says 30% of the population, of the world population, identifies as introvert. But then
that was before air conditioning. Yeah, that study's old.
Right. And then, then it started to tick up. And then another study was like, it's 50-50. And then in 2018, I think it was YouGov, said actually it's like 54 or 53%. And that was in 2018. And so now with people working remotely and they're not forced into these social situations, they realize, actually I am more of an introvert and I don't need to be an extrovert to survive because I don't have to be in these social situations anymore. I can get my job done and get paid without being forced to be an extrovert. So, and then you also have, more autism out there now, and there's debates on whether or not it's just because we're diagnosing it more, or is there actually an increase in autism, but they tend to be introverts. And then also people that are gifted, it's like 70% of gifted people are introverts. Yeah. So here we are in all of these social situations, forcing them to be extroverts, which they absolutely dread. So how do you address that? So the first thing I thought is, all right, I'm going to tell the group that we're not going to do these introductions in the same way. So first part was to explain it, and this is why, because we know it's annoying and we're doing something new for you. And I saw all the people on the bus nodding, like, yes, absolutely.
Lighting
We
up.
don't,
Yeah.
yep, okay. And a lot of them let out these sighs of relief, like, oh, good, they're not going to force us right away into this awkward.
Anxiety goes
Yeah,
down.
now,
Right.
and,
People
right.
live longer. Some introverts live longer. Okay, I get
Yeah,
it.
I saw people take a deep breath and sit back and relax. Like, okay, all right. But the other thing is, with a bus situation, people have strong opinions about where they're sitting. And I know that happens also in theaters or what have you. I mean, if someone needs to go to the bathroom, they want to sit on an aisle seat or what have you. And if someone can't hear very well, they want to be up to the, closer to the front. And so I just let people pick their seats. Some people want to be at the front of the bus, the back of the bus, the middle, for a window seat for whatever reason. And then I just grouped them based off where they had already decided to sit. So they're already comfortable physically. Now, mentally and emotionally, I've made them comfortable because I'm telling them I'm not going to force you into this introduction. And then it was, okay, so you can introduce yourself in your little pod and then select a person that'll introduce everyone later. So that allowed the extroverts to say, oh, I'm going to be the one who takes to the microphone. So now they feel good. And if in the off chance every single person in that group was an introvert, at least they know they have a team of people cheering them on, gives them the moral support, for that. And so then the next part was to create a team name, and I didn't want to give them the ability to pick any name, because then once again, like, what's your favorite movie? There's 500,000 options out there. To pick a team name, it's going to take forever, and then it won't be that much fun.
Yeah.
So I gave them a combination of words, funny words, and nouns and verbs and all that, and they had to draw from a bag and to then create an association name, and then their mission, and maybe the names of their members and all that. And they really took to it. They were giggling and proud of the words that they came up with. Do you remember your association offhand?
Oh, I don't. I knew you were going to ask that. As soon as you started talking about it,
that's okay.
I don't.
That's all right. That's all right. I do know that the pipsqueaks continued to chant for themselves.
Go Pips.
Yeah.
I hear it like probably twice a week, believe it or not. I mean, somebody will say it still.
Yeah.
I mean,
Were
I
you the
expect to
lumbering-
hear it in the grocery store here soon.
I thought, like, weren't you like a lumbering lumberjack or something?
I was on the lumbering jack team, meandering lumberjacks of
something
some
like
sort.
that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I enjoyed that part. Yes. It's more into the competitions, you know me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I mean, they had a lot of fun coming up with those names as well.
But I think just the deposit of not having to make people like stand up in front of everybody, call out something about themselves, and just sort of immediately start giving themselves away, I thought was a really great way of just kind of rethinking the introductions, letting people kind of be where they are, and then slowly on-ramping them into a scenario where you're not forced, but you're planned to participate. And everybody did. I think, not even an hour in, everybody was up and moving and talking and everything that you could possibly imagine you would want out of a networking event. I'll call it that. A trip. It just sort of happened. And I think people think like, oh yeah, it must have been the people, or was that we're on a bus? It was like, actually, it was just very well orchestrated from the beginning of how do you get a group of people who don't all know each other to then interact, plan together, play together, share. And it was really cool.
Thank you. So the other thing I thought about is, first off, I don't want them to be bored, and then I don't want anyone to feel trapped. And what if they were sitting next to someone that they weren't gelling with? So how do we allow them to shift and move and not be stuck in the same spot? So that's why we had those social seat shuffle socials, right? I think we called it. Yeah. And then, okay, now you're sitting next to someone new. How do you get the conversation going again? So that's why I gave them those sort of interesting questions to ask each other. And when I ask these questions and when I give questions to people, back to your point of making others comfortable, I don't want to ask a personal question. I want to ask them questions that allow them to showcase how they think, but it also is safe because there's no wrong answer. and I'm telling them to get weird and ridiculous, and it's not trivia where there's a precise actual answer. I'm looking for a weird answer instead. So then they're giggling with each other and they feel safe, but they're getting to know each other because they can see how the other person thinks.
It is much more interesting, I know your word, to see how people get creative, how creative they get, and sort of which elements of themselves they inject into an answer. Is it like really practical? Is it a little bit more off the wall? Is it still some way personal, and they're using or leveraging in their own experience to come up with something? Are they just completely factual and they'll never get out of the factual sense of like, well, it can't do that or it can do this? But
Yeah.
so they are telling you things about themselves without necessarily pointing at themselves or using their own name.
Yeah. So I like to call those conversation spikes. And one of them that I like to throw out there, like at a stuffy chamber of commerce networking breakfast or have you, there's always lots of milk and lots of, everyone, there's the oat milk and the soy milk and the half and the 2% and all that.
Not
and
that there's anything wrong with soy milk, but yeah.
And so what I do is I collect unusual facts and then I follow it up with a question to get people talking. And so one of my favorites is cockroach milk has 4 times the protein as cow's milk. How do you milk a cockroach? And so that's, to your point, you'll see the scientific analytical types. They might even take out a piece of paper and draw like a salad spinner and say, okay, well, here's, now you have a mechanical engineer at the table and they're coming up with the actual way to knock the milk out of the cockroach. And then someone else like, that's disgusting, I don't even want to talk about this. And then someone else will say, oh, it could be like a wine festival where you put them all in a barrel and then you get in there and squish them out. And you stand in there with your bare feet and, oh, would you drink cockroach milk? And the bodybuilder at the table, yeah, I would. If there's that much more protein, I'd give it a shot. And, and so you're in a safe environment. Like, we're not talking about politics or religion or being antagonistic towards each other, and then they're giggling about this ridiculous thing, and then there's all these inside jokes that are created, and so they can reference back to that later, and they'll remember the person that drew the salad spinner, and they're like, that's the person I want on my team to help invent something or what have you.
There's a deeper element to laughing with somebody, right? It's not just about the humor, although I will trust that everybody likes to laugh.
Yes.
I'll say that as a generalization. And there's a time to be serious, and there's a time to laugh. And again, aside from the enjoyment of just laughing and all the scientific endorphin releases and good things that it does for your body, you'll live longer if you're a funny introvert, maybe, and is what we were concluding today. But also, there's an element of just relationship building. When you laugh with somebody, you feel like you're doing some life with them. You're building a level of trust and shared connection, which I would suggest leads to better conversations when you do eventually circle back to something that's more, I'm not going to use professional, I'm going to keep using serious, because I think laughter can be professional. But
it is.
The more serious aspect of the career, the association, the industry, the work that you're there for. But I think it opens doors at an emotional level, subconscious level, and leads to just much greater things.
Yes. And when you have that strong rapport, then you're able to accomplish other projects. They're going to answer your phone calls. They're going to respond to your emails because they like you. And that's important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And because we've laughed together so much, I can later in the show ask you some personal questions that you just said aren't on the table, but then we'll get there.
All right.
But I did put this out for the show about biggest mistakes, and you said, oh, there's so many. I find that people are actually more willing to share their mistakes than they are their accomplishments. Sometimes it's more difficult for folks to really stand on top of the pedestal, beat their own chest, and get on the megaphone than it is to just talk about something that was a mistake. So I will ask you that now. Can you share a mistake with us and maybe what you learned?
Okay. I've had a lot of mistakes. Lots. And a catalog of mistakes. Yeah. So I'd say from like an association perspective. So when I ran the affinity marketing division at Geico, we had a client that was huge, huge. They had 4 million members. All right. And I don't want to say who it is, just huge. And
That's huge.
yeah, big. And we got lots of quotes, lots of policies came in from that account. And when it came time to renew, and let me back up, before renewal, they were very demanding because they knew they were big. They were the homecoming king or whatever, and they just expected us to, kiss their butts. And so they were always asking for special treatment, and they wanted reports that didn't exist, and we would have to get other people from other departments to stop everything that they were doing to create the special report for this particular, partner. Just
I
a
know the
lot of
type. Yeah.
yeah. And that was like, they say jump, you say how high, and all
of
that.
course.
And so we had it was time to renew the contract, and they wanted the chief operating officer of Geico to go with me. And because of a clerical error, he had a different time on his calendar than the time that we were going to actually meet. And so he wasn't able to come because he's busy and his calendar is totally full. He says, they know you. They talk to you almost every other day. You can handle this on your own. Just go, go to the meeting. And one guy at the meeting was furious that I didn't bring the chief operating officer. And so they decided not to renew because his ego was crushed that I didn't get this. Yes. I mean, just completely crushed. So that's where I was glad that I didn't work for commission at that point, because I lost this massive account. But what was interesting, all right, so there are a couple of things there. Is one, you always want to make sure you understand the ego needs of the people at the table. To lose an account simply because I probably could have rescheduled to make sure that the chief operating officer was there. I could have, but we wanted just to get this meeting done and move on. And I thought, surely I'm enough, but clearly I wasn't. And so that's number one. So then number two, I learned that just because you have a large client, you got to be careful. You need to make sure that you have a diverse portfolio of customers, because you don't want to completely implode when one of them decides to leave, especially for just a ego stroking situation here. And then third, because that freed up some time, we were actually able to bring on other clients that were much easier to work with. And we grew so quickly because we didn't have to deal with the day-to-day demands of this particular or large organization, who then wound up coming back to us later anyway. So then the portfolio really exploded. But at that point, I was like, well, do not call me all the time with all these little nitpicky reports. I'm not going to do it. I have other things to do. So I no longer bowed down to all of their needs because they were more humble when they came back as well. So it was a big mistake that I certainly would hope no one else makes. I mean, they learn from this, but also there were other positives out of it. And if I look back at it, I wish I hadn't given them so much leeway to make them think that they were so important to begin with. I mean, all partners are important, but sometimes they abuse it, right? If they know you're the number, if they feel like, you want everyone to feel like they're your number one client, but sometimes a little pushback might be in order as well.
It's good,
Maybe.
but if you hadn't done that and it hadn't planned, rolled out the way that it did, maybe you wouldn't have learned the lesson. So
yeah. Well, and we wouldn't have grown that fast. Like we
Yeah.
grew exponentially because I didn't have that large client taking up so much of my time.
Yeah, time is valuable. Time is precious. Like, you got to really factor that in any deal. Like, how much time is this going to cost us? Because the opportunity of this client, means, as in this case, many others. So
Yeah. Was.
awesome. What?
Go ahead.
Oh, you got something else?
I have tons of mistakes. I thought maybe that's enough. If you want another one,
I'll hold you to one mistake this time.
Okay.
We can talk about more over a beer, and then I can share
Okay.
more too that aren't on the air. I can use real
Okay,
names.
all right.
It's all good.
Uh-huh.
What about? I prepped you for this one too. Something that's hits your calendar every year. What's something you look forward to? You're gonna write it in with a pen, not like, oh, let me pencil this in. Like, it's going in with pen, magic marker, Sharpie. It's not moving.
Okay. So I started writing a book in 2020, and I had to put it down because of all the craziness that was happening in 2020, and I had to figure out how to survive. And so then in 2021, then I really started writing, and I had the bulk of it done, and there was just a little bit left, just a little bit. And I have talked about that little bit since the end of 2021 through 2022. I was like, oh yeah, I'll have it done. And here we are. 2025 is coming around the corner, and that book is mocking me. It is so embarrassing. People that I don't even know who have seen me speak like a year ago or 2 years ago will send me a message like, waiting for that book to come out. When's the book going to come out? So I hate hearing myself talk about it so much. I'm annoyed with myself. It has to get done. And then that means in 2025, I'm out there promoting it and all that stuff. So there you go.
All right. Give us a date. What's the completion date? When's the first copy available?
I mean, well, okay. So first copy, I have to send it to someone who then puts me in their work queue, and then they're the ones who decide how to format it and all that kind of stuff. So I can't give you a specific date on that, but I could give you a specific date on the rough draft, and I'll send you a hard copy. How's that?
That'll work. What's the
Does
date?
that work?
It'll really pin you. That way, if you can give us a date, then the audience can also text you. I'll put your personal cell phone number in the listing, and everybody can text you, and you'll have
personal cell phone.
I was going to say, thousands, but tens of dozens of listeners here.
Oh no.
June 30th.
Let's say November. Let's say November 7th. That's 2 weeks from now.
Oh, this year. I was talking about 25.
Well,
okay.
Because all through 2025 we'll be promoting the book, and then of course it takes a while to,
all right,
advertise
folks,
it. And all
you heard it here first.
Crap.
And the question that you hate, something about yourself. Tell us something about yourself, Dee, as you just told us not to ask people about themselves. But
yeah.
We don't know.
Okay. Do you know all those ads about the water in Camp Lejeune?
I have
you
seen
heard those ads?
plenty of those ads, yes.
Did you? Yeah. I lived in Camp Lejeune, and I bathed and drank that toxic water. I am.
What?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you get tested?
So they are handing out all this money to people that have serious illnesses.
Yeah.
And I don't have any on the list. Now, I do have ADHD, but they're not really tying that to the toxic water. But I can tell you, anytime I do something that's very odd, it just doesn't make sense, I'd like you to cut me a little bit of slack and know that I was sucking on that hose, drinking all that toxic Camp Lejeune water, and that's what you need to chalk it up to. Yeah.
Sure. I hope other listeners to give you that grace. You won't get it from me, but I think that's wonderful that others sort of give you a little bit of leeway.
And Camp Lejeune, that's where I came up with my first Halloween outfit. I know we got Halloween coming up right around the corner. For up until then, my parents had always picked my Halloween costume, but that was the first time I was able to pick my own. And it's actually well, it's sort of tied to that toxic water, actually. So as a little kid,
flesh-eating bacteria. Did you go?
Well, all right. So they had terrible mosquitoes, awful mosquito population, and so they would send these trucks through the neighborhood, and no one knew when they were coming, and they would fog out the neighborhood with this toxic dust, and so everyone had their base quarters, their windows open to catch the nice breeze off the water and all that. And then that toxic dust would come in and just coat all the furniture, every little nook and cranny. And so my parents would start yelling, "The bug man is coming." And then as a little kid, they were pulling me away from the window. "Get away from the window, get away from the window." And they were running around slamming all the windows and closing the doors. And so I thought there was this scary bug man trying to come into the house. Like, I didn't realize it was this truck. I thought it was like a character. So fast forward, they've put me in different costumes, and they decide I'm old enough to pick my own costume. They're like, "What do you want to be for Halloween?" "It's got to be something scary." And I said, "I want to be the bug man." And they're like, the bug man. And so they had to really think about it. Like, what in the world is she talking about? And then they realized, and they thought it was hilarious. So they put me in this sort of yellow hazmat suit. And then they drew whiskers and on my face. And they put these little pipe cleaners in my hair. And then they gave me a fly swatter. And so I went door to door, and all these other kids are in normal Halloween costumes. They're, witches, vampires, Batman, Spider-Man, that kind of thing. And then me. And so
Bug man.
right. And the people handing out the candy was like, and what are you supposed to be? And I'm like, I'm the bug man. And they're like, oh, weird kid, and they look at my dad who's smiling proudly. Yeah, interesting. I was the bug man for 3 years, and to the point that my
Wow.
parents were just so embarrassed. Like, you cannot be the bug man anymore. You need to pick something more mainstream because it's too embarrassing for them. They didn't want to walk around.
Oh, they were embarrassed.
They were embarrassed. Yeah, they thought it
I
was cute the
found
first year.
So
but-
much humor when my kids are like dressed up in the awkward things. Like, oh, Ren, you want to wear butterfly wings to school? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, you should do that, girl. You should wear whatever you want because I think it's hilarious.
You're a good dad.
Mismatching socks. She went through a phase for about a year where she wouldn't wear matching socks, knee highs. Sure. Go get it. I got videos and everything.
That's great.
My in-laws said they used to, and they lived in Florida, they would ride behind the bugmen on their bike because they love the smell. And so they're convinced they're going to die at some point of that. But they would get on their bikes. Every kid in the neighborhood would like ride behind the thing in Florida, blowing out like all the insecticide. Like, I'm glad
Love
you're
it.
still with us.
They glow in the dark.
Yeah.
They don't
maybe.
stub their toe when they're getting up in the middle of the night.
No. Well, Dee, I get the unfortunate pleasure of wrapping us up, but I do get to ask you one more question, which is there somebody in your network or that that you find interesting that you think our audience would benefit from hearing from?
Oh, okay. So many people. I would go with Joanna Pineda, and she was also on the bus, and she was a last minute addition because I think her flight was canceled. So she joined the bus. And when we were doing the zip tie activity, she has a black belt. I'm not going to say in what, but she has several belts in different martial arts, I would say, practices. And so she went around showing us a couple of self-defense moves too, which is pretty neat, like how to get out of a wrist grab and all that. So that bus is prepared. They are prepared.
They're going to take people down. I met Joanna actually for the first time on that bus in person, and I think she'd be awesome to have on the show. So
Yeah, she would be.
appreciate the recommendation, and I hope she'll come on and chat with us as well. But
Okay.
thank you, Dee. Appreciate the time. It is valuable, and I appreciate you giving us some.
All right. Thanks for having me.